This guide covers all the actions the Sage learns from level 71 to 90 in order. We go over how each action is meant to be used and recommend ways to use it when relevant. In the final summary, we outline a combat opener alongside considerations for raid buff adjustments as well as healing strategies in general. We will also briefly look into stat priorities. I will assume you already know the basics of Sage from level 70, and if not, you can view my Sage starter guide to get caught up. I will also assume you are acquainted with common abbreviations like GCD, OGCD, and weaving. And if these abbreviations are unfamiliar to you, I have a short describing GCDs and OGCDs, and a short describing weaving. Now then, at level 72, your doses, Eucratian doses, and Phlegma are upgraded to doses 2, Eucratian doses 2, and Phlegma 2. Additionally, Toxicon's potency is also increased significantly. The key difference is that Eucratian doses 2 is better than Dyscrasia on 2 targets if it lasts 18 seconds and 3 targets if it lasts 27 seconds. Phlegma 2's damage is still so high that your relationship with this spell is completely unchanged. Toxicon's damage increase still means that it is weaker than doses 2, so I still recommend that you only use it for mobility reasons. If you have 3 adder stings and time to easily gain another one without losing DPS, then you can spend one for an AoE damage benefit, however it is very small. While pulling in a dungeon context, you should apply Eucratian doses to enemies until at least 4 enemies are close enough that you can hit them with Dyscrasia. At level 74, you learn the ability Rhizomata, which immediately grants you 1 Adder Skull. The most resource-effective way to use it is to use it on cooldown when you have space for the extra Adder Skull. However, sometimes you simply won't need to spend that many Adder Skull, and other times you suddenly need a lot. For these reasons, I recommend you only use Rhizomata if you're down to 0 Adder Skull, or if you are at 1 and know you will need to use more shortly. At level 76, you learn the ability Holos, which does AoE healing and also applies a shield equal to the healing. It also reduces damage taken for 20 seconds, and this does stack with the effect from Kerachole and Tavrochole. The shield from Holos also stacks with your Eucratian spells' shields. In AoE pulls, I recommend keeping Holos for if a fight drags on beyond the second Kerachole cast to keep the damage reduction going. In a boss fight, Holos is extremely powerful for dealing with raid-wide damage, and for particularly large damage can be stacked with Kerachole. At level 78, Kerachole is upgraded to also apply a healing over time effect in addition to the damage reduction. This makes Kerachole do more healing over its duration than Ixochole, although over time. It also makes it better than Tavrochole if at least 2 players benefit from the healing. As such, due to the short cooldown and usefulness, you should try to use Kerachole as close to on cooldown as you can. For boss fights, I recommend using Kerachole just before a large attack so that your party both benefits from the damage reduction and gets the most out of the healing effect. For AoE pulls, I recommend using Kerachole alongside Haima or Soteria to start, and then using Physis alongside Tavrochole afterwards, and then again using Kerachole alone after that. At level 80, you learn the ability Panheimer. Assuming you completed the job quest line, do your job quests. This is like an AoE version of Heimer, although the potency is slightly lower. In AoE pulls, I recommend replacing Soteria with Panheimer for the second pull, meaning that you use Heimer and Panheimer for 1 pull each. This also means Soteria can be saved as an extra cooldown for when you need extra healing, rather than be part of the usual cooldown lineup. In boss fights, Panheimer can both be helpful for dealing with a single raid-wide hit, as the healing when the buff runs out can help recover afterwards, but if a raid-wide has multiple hits, then Panheimer can blunt all of the hits. To make the most of the healing from the remaining charges, you should make a point of not topping off everyone's HP as long as the buff lasts. At level 82, doses 2, Eucratian doses 2, Phlegma, Dyscrasia and Toxicon are all upgraded 1 level up. Dyscrasia is still better than doses on 2 or more targets, and I recommend applying Eucratian doses until at least 4 or 5 enemies are stacked closely enough for Dyscrasia. Toxicon now deals the same damage as doses on single target, meaning that it is not a damage loss to use Toxicon. Just make sure to save it specifically for attacking on the move. Toxicon is also still better than Dyscrasia on AoE, but I would still recommend only using it if you are forced out of range for Dyscrasia. At level 85, the potencies of Diagnosis and Cardia are improved, and at the same time, the shield sizes of Eucratian Diagnosis and Prognosis are increased. This does not really change anything for your playstyle, but the Cardia heal in particular may make it significantly easier to keep a tank alive with it. At level 86, you learn the ability Krasis, which increases the healing received by a target for a bit. This can be useful for applying a large Eucratian diagnosis or if your tank needs extra healing in general. For the sake of clarity, Cardia's healing is also increased by Krasis, so you can stack Soteria and Krasis together for a big passive healing boost if you wish. You will probably mainly be using Krasis on a tank, but you can also combine it with Zoe for a very large Eucratian diagnosis as your tank prepares to pull. At level 88, Zoe's cooldown is reduced to only 90 seconds. Due to its rather niche use, you should still consider using it whenever you plan to use a healing spell. Sometimes using Zoe may be excessive though, so remember to keep Zoe for later if there is a bigger opportunity coming. In fact, I like to use Zoe for the level 90 spell when possible, even though their cooldowns don't always align. Speaking of which, at level 90 you learn the spell Pneuma, the signature laser cannon spell of the Sage. This does damage somewhat equivalent to Toxicon, slightly more AoE, on a cast time, so for the damage alone, this is absolutely not worth it. As Pneuma does damage, it also activates Cardia. Pneuma also heals everyone for a massive amount, which is affected by Zoe as well. Take note that as Zoe is only activated by healing spells and has a 30-second duration, you can activate Zoe way in advance if you know that the next healing spell, or Pneuma, that you will use is within 30 seconds. This helps Zoe's cooldown to get ready again sooner. I do not recommend this strategy, however, for pulling bosses, you could prepare Eucrasia beforehand and then precast Pneuma instead of a Dosis, such that you can immediately follow up with Eucrasian Dosis without the 1-second Eucrasia cast. Take note that this does in fact mean that you are sacrificing all of the defensive value of Pneuma for saving 1 second for attacking. To round off, let's first talk about an opener for boss fights, followed by more general healing tips and advice to make the most of your tools in dungeons and raids. Finally, we briefly touch on stat priorities. For the opener, make sure before combat to apply Cardion to the main tank. Remember that you can always move Cardion to someone else that needs it. Then, 10 seconds before combat starts, use Eucrasia and then either Diagnosis or Prognosis, depending on what the fight demands. If you are uncertain, use Prognosis. You can also add Diagnosis separately to the main tank. And you can also add Zoe to this cast if you know you will not need it otherwise. Next, if you intend to use a tincture, a so-called burst potion, use it 3 seconds before pull, and then 1.5 seconds before pull, start casting Doses, followed by Eucrasian Doses. After that, cast Doses 2 more times, and then cast Phlegma twice. If you know there are no raid buffs in your party, or you cannot rely on them, you can also choose to cast 1 Phlegma immediately after applying your dot, and then save the other for movement or if raid buffs come up anyway. After that, you simply cast Doses whenever you can, and keep your dot up. Use Toxicon to keep up the attack when you have to move a lot. You can avoid needing to do this much by making extensive use of slide casting while casting Doses, which I have a separate 1-minute short about. If you are in a coordinated raid team that does use raid cooldowns on time, take note that the cooldown of Phlegma allows you to fit 2 of them in the raid buffs every 2 minutes, leaving 1 extra for mobility in between. For healing tips, let's start with dungeon pulls, including the attacking part. Apply Eucrasian Diagnosis to the tank, preferably before they enter combat, and then use Sprint. Alternatively, you can use Sprint after the tank, just keep in mind that using Sprint before entering combat doubles its duration. Then repeatedly apply your dot to as many enemies as you can, 4 or 5 should do. Once you have spread your dot to all available enemies, or at least 4 or 5 enemies are clumped together, switch to using Dyscrasia. When all the enemies are clumped together, use Phlegma. When the tank reaches their destination, apply Kerachole followed by either Heimer or Panheimer. Yes, even though Panheimer is a party-wide effect. As Kerachole runs out, apply Physis and use Tavrochole to keep up healing over time and damage reduction. If the fight continues beyond this, use Kerachole again, and if it continues even further beyond this, use Holos. Krasis, Soteria, Zoe, Pneuma, Rhizomata, and any excess Adderskull you may have are kept as backup in case something goes wrong. For boss fights, it is less clear-cut what you should do when. Generally, it is a good idea to use Kerachole whenever you see raid-wide damage incoming. Heimer can be helpful to assist the tank with a tank buster. Panheimer and Holos can both be used for helping with raid-wide damage as well, where Panheimer stands out particularly well in attacks that hit multiple times back to back. Zoe and Pneuma are also super helpful for quickly bringing your raid up to safe HP amounts after a large raid-wide attack, or even to save just the tank if they're dangerously close to death. Often in particularly difficult boss fights, you will have to learn what you need to use when on a case-by-case basis. That is to say, using everything reactively can sometimes lead to you not having enough strong cooldowns for when something really big comes up. Try to plan out when to use what in hard content like Extremes, Savage and Ultimate. In fact, for certain Savage and Ultimate fights, using Zoe on Eucrasian Prognosis may sometimes be helpful for a larger shield. Finally, regarding stat priorities, keep in mind that in nearly every single case, item level beats out optimal secondary stats. So you should always prioritize higher item levels first, as long as the item has mind on it. After this, prioritize critical hit over everything else, followed by direct hit and closely behind that, determination. Direct hit does not exist on healer gear, so generally this will appear through materia only. Spell speed is not a particularly significant stat for sages due to your Eucrasia spells not being affected by them, and having more spell speed does not give you additional Phlegma casts either. And finally, Piety increases your passive MP regeneration, and while this can be helpful, you should only actively go out of your way to get extra Piety if you need it. Make sure you are making good use of Adderskull and all your free healing options, not to mention Lucid Dreaming. And only then, if you still run out of MP throughout a fight, consider getting some more Piety. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to support me and my channel, you can like the video, leave a comment, subscribe and hit the bell to get notified when next I post a video. And if you want to give even more support than that, you can also become a member of the channel. Fun fact, originally Holos only applied healing and damage reduction, but in patch 6.2 it was buffed to now also apply a shield for the same value. I'm guessing this is a way to help Sage compete with the wildly massive shield Scholar can apply with Recitation, Protraction, Fey Illumination, Adlocurium and Deployment Tactics.